Being the first to charge an army or fortress often meant certain death. The small groups of men who took on these dangerous tasks were known as Forlorn hopes. They formed the spearhead of an army and charged into a breach first, drew the enemy's fire or covered their comrades' retreat. Despite the enormous risk, there were almost always enough volunteers. In this video, we ask why soldiers in the Napoleonic Wars were willing to risk their lives in such suicide missions. In January of 1812, Arthur Wesley, the future Duke of Wellington, attacked Ciudad Rodrigo, a Spanish city occupied by the French under Napoleon Bonaparte. After several days of bombardment, Wellington gave the order to storm on the evening of the 19th of January 1812. As darkness fell, two forlorn hopes advanced against the breaches. Before them lay the most daunting task an infantryman could imagine. They had to fight through a network of deadly traps, penetrate a heavily guarded defensive line, and finally knock the enemy off their superior position on the wall. William Mackay, a young lieutenant of the Connaught Rangers, better known as the Devil's Own, led the forlorn hope at the northwestern breach. When he realized that the way was utterly barricaded, he had his men scale the walls to the right and left of the breach. They suffered heavy casualties and made it to the top only when the vanguard, which had followed hard on their heels, pushed on. The French began to fall back, but suddenly a mine exploded, killing those already on the wall. Mackay's forlorn hope was almost annihilated, but it had achieved its objective, opening a way into the town. Mackay was one of the few who survived. After the siege, he was honored for his bravery and promoted to captain. Those who volunteered for the forlorn hope had much to gain and a lot to lose. Peter O'Hare, an Irish major, predicted he would be, quote, a lieutenant colonel or cold meat within a few hours. The death toll was immense. At the first siege of Badajoz in 1811, just 18 of the 200 men who attacked Fort San Cristobal in the Forlorn Hope returned to the English camp. Nevertheless, from a tactical point of view, a Forlorn Hope was very effective. If successful, it could end a siege within a few hours, saving vast resources, money and lives. From an army commander's perspective, it's clear why Forlorn Hopes were used. What is more difficult to understand is why individual soldiers took the risk. If you want to follow in the footsteps of the men charging the breach at Badajoz, but don't want to spend hours looking for SIM card stores or pay excessive roaming fees, then consider using the service of today's sponsor Saily Esim. Saily offers affordable data packages for over 190 destinations in 8 regions, ensuring you always have a reliable connection. It's super simple. Download the Saily app, choose your data package, and install the Saily Esim before you travel. Upon arrival, Saily Esim will activate automatically, and you can start surfing right after you land at your destination. With Saily, you'll never again accidentally connect to another provider's network and pay high fees. Saily is compatible with iOS and Android devices, has a 24/7 chat support, and offers a full refund if your device is not compatible with an eSIM for any reason. Get an exclusive 15% discount on your Saily eSIM data plan. Download Saily and use code SandRhoman at checkout. The forlorn hopes of the Napoleonic Wars were made famous by the masterful storyteller Bernard Cornwell and his Sharpe series. In the book Sharpe's Company and its filmization, the fictional hero Richard Sharpe throws himself into the breaches at Badajoz at the sharp end. However, the forlorn hope tactic per se existed long before the Napoleonic Wars. It was used by many armies in the Middle Ages and the early modern period. For example, in the English Civil War, Cromwell's new model army used forlorn hope companies to draw the enemy's fire and force them to reveal their position or to blow up mines before the main force attacked. In 18th century France, units known as enfants perdus, in English lost children, served as assault troops. Finally, the forlorn hope of the German Landsknechts consisted of a small squad of heavily armed men who fought under a blood-red banner and tried to break the enemy ranks to create a weak point. Because these units operated independently from the main force, they were referred to as verlorener Haufen in German or verloren Hoop in Dutch, both of which literally translate to lost heap. So, in its original sense, the term Forlorn Hope referred to a unit called heap or bunch that operated independently of the main force and was, in this sense, lost. When English speakers first encountered the expression Verloren Hoop, they misheard it as Forlorn Hope, the term now used to mean a hopeless or desperate undertaking, a suicide mission. In many armies, a Forlorn Hope consisted of volunteers, criminals who wanted to clear their names, and men chosen by lot. Wellington's Forlorn Hopes, on the other hand, were made up almost entirely of volunteers. When the officers were looking for men a few days before an assault or battle, they often even competed for a place in the Forlorn Hope. For example, some non-commissioned officers temporarily fought as privates, below their actual rank, and soldiers were also known to pay their comrades to buy their way in. There were actually a few good reasons to volunteer. Those who survived a mission in the Forlorn Hope were richly rewarded. Officers who volunteered were often promoted, which attracted young, ambitious men. There was no guarantee of promotion, at least in Wellington's army, but the chances were good. In addition, the volunteers were often decorated and financially rewarded, which probably encouraged ordinary soldiers, who rarely owed much, to take the risk. Beyond the official rewards, those who entered the city first could get a head start on plundering, a practice for which Wellington's troops once called the scum of the earth by Wellington himself were notorious. In addition to reward and promotion, joining a Forlorn Hope was a chance to make a name for oneself. William Mackay, who we met in our introductory example, did not volunteer because he was hoping for a promotion. He was the most senior lieutenant in his unit and would have been captain anyway as soon as one of his superiors fell. His motivation was his code of honor as an officer. The officers of the time were willing to give their lives for honor, and being part of the Forlorn Hope, or even leading it, was one of the greatest honors of all. The example of Captain Uniacke, who was severely burned in the explosion during the storming of Ciudad Rodrigo and died 3 days later, illustrates how deeply this mattered to men of honor. Uniacke did not dedicate his last words to his beloved wife. Instead, he declared, quote, "Remember, I was the first man that entered the breach." This attitude reflects a definition of courage that might feel alien to us today, and differs significantly from the ideals prevalent in antiquity and the Middle Ages. In early modern warfare, heroic one-on-one combat had no place. People fought in formation, and their best chance for survival was to stick together. This required a different kind of bravery than what might be needed for a duel or an assault on horseback. This type of bravery required disciplined steadfastness, the courage to face death unblinkingly in the name of one's country and comrades, stay in formation and do one's duty. In this context, joining the Forlorn Hope and taking the greatest risk of all was considered particularly courageous, and those who did so had the chance to become heroes to their comrades. In Uniacke's case, the hope was realized. According to one of his soldiers, quote, "His affability and personal courage had rendered him the ideal man of his company." Mackay was also driven by this motivation. The siege of Ciudad Rodrigo was not the only occasion on which he volunteered. At the second siege of Badajoz, a few weeks later, he was again one of the first to scale the wall. And at the Battle of Salamanca, he volunteered to join a cavalry charge. One of his comrades later wrote about him, quote, "And those who knew the temperament of the man were not surprised at it. Wherever glory and danger were to be met, there was Mackay to be found, and nothing, not even the chilling sights he had experienced, could damp his daring spirit." It was hymns of praise like this that the soldiers of the time dreamed of when they volunteered for the Forlorn Hope.